I should be writing number 382 for August 28th, 2017.
Well, I should be writing. I should be working on my craft. I should be writing. I should be submitting my next draft. But I'm sitting home watching Doctor Who.
Hi there. Welcome to I Should Be Writing, the podcast for wannabe fiction writers. I'm your host, Mer Lafferty. And last you heard from me was August 14th when I did my episode on how I didn't know what was going on at the Hugo Awards, but here's some thoughts about awards. And if you haven't figured it out by now, we did lose. We lost to Tea and Jeopardy. We actually didn't come in second even, so we lost to a couple of podcasts, I suppose you could say. But we had a great time. Well, I should speak for me and my family and Alistair Stewart and Marguerite Kenner, who were standing in for Matt, but can't speak for Matt. But if you're new to I Should Be Writing, my companion podcast, which is Ditch Diggers, which is for writers on a business level, we were nominated for the Hugo Award for Best Fan Cast, and the award show was 2 weeks ago, and we lost. And I really expected to be devastated. I was actually worried about my mental health is a little too strong of a word here. I didn't expect it to throw me into a depression, but I'd expected not to have fun for the rest of the night, because that's what happened when I lost the Campbell Award a few years ago. But I did not have a problem with it. I felt a little bit of a sting when it started, when we weren't announced, and then Ursula Vernon's husband, Kevin, passed me his flask with whiskey in it, and I took a drink and remembered that I hate whiskey, and there's nothing, even the loss of an award, that will make me want it. So I passed it back to him, and, we went, the rest of the ceremony happened, and Ursula won her category, and I was thrilled for her. And then we went to the after party, and it was fun. It was really a great time. It was an honor to be nominated for real. And then I got to go to the losers party, which is held in honor of the losers. So I get to walk around and say, I'm a loser with all these awesome people. I got to go up to George R.R. Martin and say, hey, George, I'm a loser. I need my loser ribbon to put on my badge. And he invited me to sit down with him, and we talked for a little while, and he reminded me that he's lost 17 Hugos. And I said, well, George, we have to start somewhere. This is only my first. But had a really great time. Worldcon itself was good. The live Ditch Diggers was awesome. We had Hugo-nominated editor Nava Wolf. We had my agent, Jen Udden. We had Amal Emotar, who won her Hugo. Congratulations, Amal. Volunteers Tribute, because I was worried that our third guest would not arrive. And then our third guest did arrive, which was the hip-hop band Clipping. So we ran the Hugo Games, like the Hunger Games, with 6 people. And unfortunately, Ditch Diggers tends to go long, and we only had 45 minutes. So we had to end it before the blood sport started, which was depressing. But overall, Worldcon was fantastic. So another announcement, I Should Be Writing the book is out now. Had a little bit of a hiccup when it launched. I was sick, so I was unable to focus entirely on the launch, and then found out that we had some issues with the metadata and the database of the booksellers, to where it wasn't reporting that you could order the book in some places. Like Barnes & Noble would look into the computers and say, okay, it's out, but we can't order it. This is the store. And then, but I think most of those issues are over now. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Barnes & Noble. You should be able to get it on IndieBound. I don't know if it's in bookstores yet, but I'm hoping it will be. It's been a little frustrating, but the book is out and people are, talking about it, which is great. It's funny, I had a nightmare last night that I asked somebody to review it and I sent them a copy and they gave it like a really bad review. Not that I expect good reviews, because you want an honest review, but, you worry about stuff. That's what you do. That's what I do. Worry. Pretty much. That's what I do. So I had a really nice email from a new listener asking about going back to the basics. And as this podcast is for beginning writers, I thought it would be really good to do that. So for September and October, I'm going to be doing podcasts focusing on the basics. Interviews will be coming back starting the next episode. Lastly, on the announcement area, I've revamped the Patreon, realized that a lot of the higher levels I was offering, people weren't taking advantage of. And so I've changed up what I'm offering. Now you'd think if I'm offering X and people aren't taking X, why should that stress me out? Well, the stress comes from A, guilt that people, am I not doing what I need to be doing to deliver something? And B, do I schedule my life around the fact that I know only a small number of the people who are offered these larger rewards will collect on them? Because if every single person who wanted a writing mentor actually took the 2 hangouts I offered a month, I would be a lot busier than I was regarding the Patreon rewards. And they weren't. So I had this what if kind of hanging over my head. And so I changed some things up. One thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be starting a serial fiction just for Patreon, and I'll be self-publishing it at the end. So I'm excited about that. So check out patreon.com/MightyMur if you're interested. And for the people who have already were pledged at higher levels, if this is the first you've heard of it, please check your email because I talked to you about what's going on there. So don't freak out. I promise. It's okay. So as I said, I'm going to be going back to the basics. And I guess the first thing I should talk about is rules. A lot of the questions people ask to start out with when they're writing, especially in today's world of easy self-publishing, is why should I follow these rules? And let's first talk about what rules I'm talking about. There are the rules of don't use too many adverbs. There are the rules of don't change points of view very often, or at least put a scene break before points of view change. There are the questions of the rules that different genres have. Romances require happy endings. They do. It's just that's what a romance book is. Science fiction and fantasy, it's a little bit of wiggle room here, and you'll have a lot of people at conventions getting very drunk and arguing very loudly about this. Essentially, fantasy is when, the way I figured out is, fantasy is when something happens that in no way in our world could happen. Science fiction is when, if we had the appropriate technology, it could happen. Where people get pedantic is, well, faster than light travel is impossible, so any science fiction book with faster than light travel should be a fantasy. Or Star Wars is a fantasy because it's got the Force in it. And they also have FTL. So there's wiggle room there, which is why I sometimes just call it speculative fiction. If it can't happen, it'll probably be in speculative fiction. And then there's magical realism, which is just so incredibly bizarre. But I'm getting into opinion here and not fact. But mysteries, I did not know. When I was doing research for my book 6 Weeks, I discovered that mysteries had a number of strict rules. Like one of them being that the protagonist has to solve the mystery, which sounds obvious, but I guess people had like a sidekick or somebody coming up with the key thing. And there are rules about the villain or the antagonist, how they have to be capable and a worthy opponent, things like that. So what I'm getting at is everyone's got this rebellious streak. They want to break the rules. They think, okay, well, this person broke the rules and they made $1 million. The thing is, you need to learn the rules and how to write within them before you understand how to break them. I was a strong, well, not a disbeliever in the don't use adverbs rule. It just annoyed me because they are a form of speech, and everybody who says never ever use them, they use them. Stephen King uses adverbs. And, J.K. Rowling has more money than the Queen after she just threw so many adverbs into Harry Potter. You could have made those books each book an inch shorter if she took out all the adverbs. But then I got the book Nabokov's favorite word is mauve, which is where data crunchers looked at a lot of classics and a lot of bestsellers and came up with what was consistent. And they tackle the adverb thing. And they basically say that, yes, everybody uses adverbs, but the mark of a good writer is a certain percentage of adverbs, only a small percentage of adverbs used compared to the rest of the book. Because the reason why that rule is there is because there's a better way to describe run swiftly. And when you stretch your writer muscles to try to figure out a better way to say run swiftly, the sentence becomes tighter and it reads better. And you teach your mind a little bit about word choice. And so it's not that not using adverbs, it's not that you take your crappy book and you strip out all the adverbs and suddenly it's a good book. It's instead of using adverbs, you push yourself to choose a better phrase and therefore write better. So anyway, it really is a fascinating book where statisticians look at classics and figure out who wrote what. One thing I didn't realize is that with people's new interest in the Founding Fathers due to the Broadway hit Hamilton, the introduction is written about the Federalist Papers. And according to one thing I didn't know was that Hamilton wrote several, James Madison wrote several, but somewhere along the line, there were some that no one knew who wrote them because both Hamilton and Madison claimed them. And for years, people could not agree on who wrote what. And then somebody who wasn't even into history looked at them and started comparing the word usage. So they took every single word that was used in Hamilton's and how often some words were said and how some phrases were put, and then did the same for Madison. And then they took the mystery ones, and suddenly it was easy to figure out who wrote what, just by looking at their words and the data involved. So if you're right now an English student wondering if you're going to go into journalism or writing or publishing, what you need math for, this might be a thing. Let's talk a little bit about reader expectation. So many people, including editors, say they want something new, something fresh. But if you look at Hollywood, you'll see how much they are prizing new and fresh these days. How many summer blockbusters are sequels? I just heard that they're remaking Lord of the Flies with women. Only there have been women who've written Lord of the Flies type books. They're not making those books into movies, they're just redoing Lord of the Flies with women. So what people want are, it's the old phrase that people hate, but it's true, the same thing, only different. People want to expect a certain thing. And if you don't give them what they expect, they won't like it. I was just reading about the 90s flop Hudson Hawk movie. And I remember liking it, but I was not a huge, die-hard Bruce Willis fan at the time. And I don't remember the fact that they were trying to bank on Bruce Willis's popularity and push it as an action movie. And it's not an action movie. And so because people expected an action movie, they hated it. Granted, the movie had problems, but I think it was better than people say it was. If you don't deliver on what you promise with choosing your genre, or what you promise even with the first chapter just lays down, it's not just introducing the story, it's you're telling the reader, you should expect this in this book. And that sounds like a big thing to worry about, and sounds like the kind of thing that'll make people freeze up. But, if you start your book with a chapter about an incredibly bloody murder, and then switch it to a lighthearted office comedy romance, people are going to get real confused. So if you want to do a lighthearted comedy romance that eventually leads into horrible bloody murder, you need to put in dark hints along the way. You need to lay that foreshadowing down. There was a Christmas... I'm sorry I keep talking about movies, but I know more people have seen movies than read the same book, so that's usually why I go back to that. But there was a movie done that was... And it was a good movie, but I was very disappointed in it. And I figured out why. I had gotten the sense that it was a romance. And at the end of the movie, the heroine looked at her two options and said, you know what, I think I'm good on my own. Which is an incredibly feminist message, and I love that, except the fact that I had been expecting a romance the whole way through the movie, and when that didn't deliver, I was disappointed. So if you think you're going to break the mold by doing something new and exciting and different and shocking, people are just, they're going to be confused and unhappy. You know, the hero's journey for Western literature is a pretty tried and true story. There are other journeys. There are different stories in Eastern literature that don't follow the hero's journey. But I haven't studied enough Eastern literature to speak confidently about that. But I'm saying that at least in some cultures, you can't go wrong with some of the basics. And people think about the idea of like painting a book by the numbers and how unsatisfying that is. But if you look at every single piece of media that hits and succeeds, it's going to follow a formula. There's a book called Save the Cat by, I think, Blake Snyder. Hang on. Yes, Blake Snyder. And he talks about movie scripts and how almost by certain pages of a movie script, things have to happen. And you say, well, what if your movie script is longer or shorter? Well, his point is also that the standard movie is pretty much the same length. So my first point for beginners is, yes, pay attention to the rules. Learn the hero's journey. Learn the heroine's journey, which is another... I'm talking a lot about books this episode. The Virgin's Promise, writing stories of feminine, creative, spiritual, and sexual awakening, which takes the hero's journey and feminizes it and makes it slightly different in a feminine way. And not saying women can't do the hero's journey, just that a lot of women's stories will focus more on home and not going out to adventure. And I'm not home like barefoot in the kitchen. I'm saying home like community and family, and all the conflicts that we deal with are here. And yes, that can be action-oriented. That can be heroic. You can have violence. You can have people invading the village, whatever. Just, I'm trying hard to say that this is not a lesser journey than the hero's journey. It is just different. But it also is a beat-by-beat look at stories. When you're writing your first draft, don't worry so much about anything I'm saying right now. A lot of this can be fixed on edits. Look for your ly words when you're editing. It's easier now than ever before with search and replace, except don't replace, just search. And when you get to an ly word, ask yourself if there's a better way you could phrase that sentence. Another thing to look at is words involving the senses, such as she saw, she heard, she felt. If you're telling it from her point of view, all you have to say is what's going on, not that she sees it or hears it or feels it. She jumped when a sharp knock sounded at the door. The walls began to bleed. Something pricked her skin and she felt a drop of blood come to the surface. I mean, you don't have to say she saw this, she heard this, she felt this. And I have discovered that just searching for those words has made my writing a lot stronger. And just for the record, when you search for The Virgin's Promise on Amazon, you get a lot of erotica. So if you're going to search for it, search for Virgin's Promise, writing stories of feminine, creative, spiritual, and sexual awakening, or search for Kim Hudson and Christopher Vogler, the authors. Actually, Christopher Vogler's the foreword. But Christopher Vogler wrote a lot about the hero's journey, so his foreword says a lot about the book and how it fits in with our Western storytelling concepts. I want to talk a little bit about character agency, and I'll talk about this more when it comes to when we talk about characters. The first thing is your character should want something. even if it's a glass of water. That's what all my writing teachers have told me. Because if you don't want anything, you're not going to do anything. So when you're reading, think about what each character wants in the scene. Going back to Hudson Hawk, the only thing he wanted was a cappuccino. And the joke is he keeps being denied the cappuccino by all the other plot elements. Spoiler, he does get his cappuccino at the end of the movie. But actually, there's another thing about telling people what to expect in a movie. If your main character's main goal is a cappuccino, you know that something's going to be lighthearted and fun about this movie. If that's their main goal, and they keep being denied it. It's not going to be an action movie. This is going to be something with silliness, and Hudson Hawk is very silly. But also about agency is, the common thought is characters need to be able to do something and make their own decisions. Now, think about character agency is kind of hotly debated. You know, some people say that narratives involving people being forced to do things out of their will are perfectly valid narratives. Not everybody can stand up to the antagonist. However, there's a character in a book series that I had a very weird relationship with. It's a fantasy series by Melanie Ron. It's 2 trilogies. There's supposedly 2 trilogies, but really it's a 6-book series, starting with Sunrunner's Fire. And it follows a couple of generations of a family. So you go through the falling in love and marriage of 2 powerful people, and then their rule, and then their son. But when you follow the son's life, he meets a woman who is his equal in every way, and they get along great, except when they're arguing, but they're holding their own. It's a very Tracy and Hepburn kind of thing. But then he marries this beautiful woman who is bullied by her father into being a completely passive person. And, you know, the reader's freaking out. They're like, you had your perfect match over here, and why did you marry this nothing? And this woman remains passive. And I'm sorry to spoil this part of the series, but it's very important for what I'm saying. Because she is not the type to pick up a knife and stab her kidnapper in the dark. She's not the type to even try to escape. What she does is she takes her abilities, which is embroidery, and she lies to the kidnapper saying that if he's going to kill her husband in battle, her husband will need the right funeral shroud created by his wife. And the bad guy thinks this is a great idea because it's really intimidating to send the shroud made by your wife to your enemy. So he's like, yes, make this. And she codes 2 messages into the blanket with her embroidery. And she codes 2 because she knew that the bad guy would find one and knew he wouldn't look for another one. So that's how she turns the tide of this war. She's not a fighter. She's not any sort of person who is being what we call active, but she makes a decision. So she makes her own decision here, and she uses her skills to change the course of the story. And by that time in the story, I was fascinated by her. I think another character that gets a bad rap for being passive is Sansa Stark. And she is very annoyingly passive for a good part of the first couple of Game of Thrones books. And even when she realizes that she doesn't live in a perfect lord and lady, kings and queens and knights and perfection world, she's still passive. And because Game of Thrones is an ongoing story, I won't spoil why, but when she allows people to help her out of her bad situation, she still doesn't make a decision. She lets them make the decisions for her, but she slowly learns what her skills are and where she can use them in this world to change the story for her own needs. So yeah, if Game of Thrones had been a one-shot book, Sansa Stark would have been a very boring character. So it's taken thousands of pages for her to evolve. So maybe you shouldn't work on that for your first story. or your first book, but understand that it can be done. You can have a plan for a character that has them evolve slowly, but you have to make them interesting and have to make the other people show that you know how to tell a good story. And again, if you give a bunch of characters really interesting storylines like George R.R. Martin did, then people will trust that Sansa will develop her own storyline and develop her own agency. So giving your characters decisions to make, even if they're seemingly small, but just the character making a decision for themselves, that's agency. So I have gone over a lot of rules here, and I think I'm going to end it. Next time I'll be talking about some more specific things. I think I might refresh my memory of The Virgin's Promise so I can talk more about that if we talk about plotting. And I'll put all the books I mention here on the website. Wow, a lot has happened. I realize that to you it's been 2 weeks, but to me it's like been a month since I've talked to you because I recorded 2 episodes at once. I have a new website. It should be live. Actually, this will probably go up before it's live, but it'll be very soon that it's live. Merverse.com. It's going to have a different look. It's going to be a little bit easier to maneuver around, easier to find the podcasts. I'm really happy with it. But Merverse.com is where you'll find the blog and show notes and the link to all the books I mention in this podcast, including my books, which I have to promote again. I Should Be Writing, the companion book to this podcast, is out now, and you can get it most places. I know it'll be out in September for the UK. Early September, I'm thinking. Maybe next week, hopefully. And if you want to email me any questions, mightymur@gmail.com. Next time we start doing more interviews. And you can support the Patreon at patreon.com/mightymur. And if you're a long-time-ish listener, you'll notice that I have been able to do semi-monthly, bi-weekly. I can't remember which is which. I'm sorry. Twice a month podcast. Every other week I do I Should Be Writing, and then every other week I do Ditch Diggers. But I'm saying if I can get to $3,000 on my Patreon, I will go to weekly for both podcasts. So every week you'll get an I Should Be Writing and a Ditch Diggers. So spread the word. My other book, 6 Wakes, is also out. People are still talking about it, still saying it's good, which makes me very, very happy. Space murder mystery. It starts with a lot of floating blood. 0G blood is so interesting. And if you're interested in short fiction, I edit a magazine called Escape Pod. I co-edit, with Divya Breed, and we bring you free science fiction every week. And that's at escapepod.org. So when you're a freelancer and you're spinning a lot of plates, it's hard to remember every single thing you're working on to mention, but you love all your children equally. I hope your summer or winter is going well and that you're getting stuff done because you should be writing. Remember, you can support the show at patreon.com/mightymur. I Should Be Writing theme music provided by John Anelio. You can find more about him at johnanelio.com. This podcast is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike license. But I should be